pedestrians to go under the highway, and then again, choose an alignment along the choose an experience along the High Plains Trail or one along the Colton Trail. So the crossing will be up near the top of the mesa and allow easy access to either of those trails. Another really interesting component of this project is a proposed wildlife crossing. And you'll see in a minute this is actually the more expensive portion of the project, but the idea here is to create a more amenable crossing of the highway for wildlife that are in Rocky Flats and then populations that also occur in Boulder County. So again, we have a threatened species here, the Preble's meadow jumping mouse. We have populations that are recognized and habitat that's recognized as critical on the National Wildlife Refuge, and this wildlife crossing would be an effort to allow or to ensure that the mouse can have safe passage under the highway and get to points to the north. And this passage would also be used by other wildlife, of course, as well. And so this crossing would be in the vicinity of actual Rock Creek itself. And so the passage underpass would probably also serve some flood kind of resiliency, just some flood resiliency purposes as well. Here's a depiction of Rocky Flats trail development plan, and what we're looking at here is the proposal for the Greenway would be a crossing here of Indiana, and then using some alignments to get over to this crossing over here on the north boundary of Rocky Flats.
Oh, I would just make a note. So this is the map from the Comprehensive Conservation Plan, which is the sort of master plan for Rocky Flats. They have updated maps. In fact, we received yesterday, we got a briefing from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, an updated map, which I have at the end of the presentation, which I can pull up to show you that exact alignment.
All right. Do you want to talk at all about this one? And I can too. So the project requires a 17% local match and participation in that second site. That's again the only site that we would be participating in. And really what this is a way for the county to leverage the involvement of a variety of local agencies and then allow that money to leverage this incredible federal dollar match and contribution to this project. And so, I mean, it's something that's a partnership of all these agencies and cities, and then something that allows us to also access this funding from the federal government. And then if both of the projects, so again, I think we've got a slide coming up here that shows the costs of the two crossings. Again, the wildlife crossing, which actually has the higher price tag here, $3.5 million, and then the trail underpass, which would cost about $750,000. And so combined, our share of that would be approximately $122,000. And so when we presented this to POSAC in February, our Open Space Advisory Board was just sort of jumping up and down for joy. So here was an opportunity for the county to, for a relative minimal outlay of $122,000, gain this kind of amenities and federal investment in Boulder County.
Can you show that previous slide again? So
Yeah.
I want to get the amount for Boulder County.
Yes, yes, and I just would like to make clarify for the commissioners and anybody else who might be listening that in the posted document, this chart shows the two blocks in blue, the wildlife crossing and the trail crossing are transposed, they're switched. It was an error in the documents that we received from the engineer. So I just want to make it clear that what I have posted is accurate, and we will repost this with that change reflected. But the total investment for Boulder County is the same. It's $122,780. And that is if both components, which we are submitting, if we participate, it would include both the underpass, which is the more expensive component, as well as the trail, which is the least costly component. So if both of them were to be accepted for funding. I'll go back for you, so, Mr. Moore.
Thank you.
You bet. I think we can go
Okay.
past that one. All right, so again, as I mentioned earlier, POSAC approved this at their February meeting, and as Megan indicated, the application is due towards the end of May, and then she's got some other timeline and project timeline and schedule information there as well. Once the grant, if it was approved, the project is going to take a little while before this could be completed due to some permitting, the environmental analysis, and those kinds of things.
Yes. Yeah, so I think it's important to note, since this is federal funding, NEPA analysis will be required for the sites that would be awarded. So potentially for both of those sites, the underpass and for the trail underpass. So what we're requesting from the commissioners today is to consider approval of Boulder County's involvement in the project. And if you approve, then to direct staff to bring a resolution of support. The grant requires a formal resolution of support, which would be packaged into the grant application that Jefferson County is submitting. And that would come to you at a regular business meeting, probably either late next week or early. And we would be happy to take questions.
Great, thanks so much. Questions?
Yeah, just a couple. First of all, thank you very much for your presentation and bringing us up to date on the proposal. On the two crossings, just checking in on the wildlife crossing, I assume that would solely be a wildlife crossing. Pedestrians and bikes and equestrians would not access it.
We've been in discussions with a variety of people, the consultants that are working on the actual application, and then in discussions with Fish and Wildlife Service and then other staff at Boulder County Parks and Open Space. And our sense there was, especially within the department, that trying to combine the trail with the wildlife crossing down at Rock Creek was going to present some problems in terms of wildlife impacts and those sorts of things. So our recommendation has been to keep the trail separated and keep the trail connection further to the west. Another complication for that was going to be that by having the trail do the underpass at the creek crossing, it was going to require some extensive trail and switchbacks on our Lindsay open space property, which then was going to, oh, thank you, Megan, was then going to kind of affect some of the resources there and our agricultural use of that property. So having the crossing further west kind of eliminates some of those complications.
The topo looks pretty extreme.
Yeah, it's a big, that's that part of the state highway that's kind of that big hill that goes down into the Rock Creek Valley and kind of goes back up as you get over to the McCaslin intersection. So,
Thanks. Thank you. And then I just had a question about the NEPA piece, but maybe that's a longer answer than if anybody else has one before that.
Could I just follow up on that? So FLAP money can be used for wildlife crossings that don't provide public access. Obviously, it's part of the proposal.
Yep, that's our understanding. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Did you have any on this piece of it before you move to?
Well, I mean, maybe just a general question, and then we can, I know we're going to hear from some folks, and then we can follow up with more detail, but generally speaking, in the NEPA process, we should be able to lay out some criterion about what we think that should look like. And then two, if for some reason, as we move forward in this process, it doesn't make sense to have those crossings in those particular locations. Do we know if moving them would be an option? That might be for some future discussion as well. I mean, do we know that at this point, or?
So my understanding in conversations with the consultant who's working on the application is that there's some ability to move it based on the NEPA analysis. You could move it to address specific impacts that were identified through that analysis, and identifying another route where, or another option for mitigating the impacts, or a route that would avoid those impacts. So yes, we would have the ability to look, more closely at what some of those impacts would be through that NEPA analysis.
Megan, do you know if is the county applying for any other flat grants in any other way, or?
So I have spoken with transportation, and they're investigating the possibility of applying for a grant for the Hesse Trail shuttle service, and they have not yet had conversations with all the partners involved in that, including the Forest Service. So it, I think, depends on what the interests are of all those parties, and they also have been communicating with the FLAP oversight folks to find out, what their thoughts are about having two applications. However, this is not, Boulder County's would be a partner. We wouldn't be moving the application forward. We would be a partner with other folks who chose to participate in this particular application. So I'm not sure that that would affect the ability of them to compete or not.
It wouldn't be part of this application, but then we had, back in the beginning when we were having the conceptual dotted line conversations about the Rocky Mountain Greenway, and before the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had not really gotten engaged in opening up the refuge, then the dotted line went, up Indiana and along the northern border of 128, or Highway 128. And so kind of continuing on your theme of having alternate routings, it would be possible for us to, in that, make a recommendation that we continue to have both of those discussions, that have alternatives if we want to.
Yeah, so we received a draft feasibility study, but there will be some time before that feasibility study that shows potential alignments if Boulder County is completed, and so I think there is certainly the possibility of looking at another alignment, an alternate alignment through that Rocky Mountain Greenway feasibility study. FLAP grant funding is really for the access piece, so the funding wouldn't be available for that. You couldn't, for example, move from this proposal all the way off-site with no connection to Rocky Flats, because the intent of FLAP is to make those connections. But I think for the purpose of the Rocky Mountain Greenway, you could identify an alternate alignment, yes.
And have two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just have one question, and maybe you already said that and I just missed it. Have any of the other jurisdictions that are involved in this gone through their process and taken a position that would be the first ones?
The City of Boulder will take it up tonight, and I believe Westminster and Arvada have gone through open space process, and I'm not sure what the dates are for their council. In the next 2 weeks, most of the local governments will be looking at it.
I'm not sure we need to do you have a quick overview of NEPA so that everybody understands what would happen? Or is that more of a long-term question that's going to take longer to explain than useful?
No, I think that's a very fair assessment. I think what it would do in this case is, one of the big components of NEPA is looking at alternatives and alternative analysis, and so they would be looking at the proposed action, the idea of having these two corridors, looking at those impacts, all kinds of impacts, social, environmental, all sorts of things associated with those two crossing, with that proposed action of the crossings. And then they would be looking at, are there alternatives to those that would have less impact on those various things, the recreational aspect, the environmental aspect. I mean, I guess I would say that from a planning perspective, there really isn't a more in-depth environmental analysis around. I mean, the NEPA process is kind of the crowning environmental planning process in the United States, I would say, at least one of them. So, and especially appropriate and is always required with federal actions and when federal monies are involved. So that's really short, but I don't know if that.
But it'll be it would be a very thorough process.
It would be a very thorough process involving all kinds of, people from the National Wildlife Refuge, people associated with Fish and Wildlife that would be